a love-hate thing with me in the schedule release. I want to see the games. I want to know when they're playing where and what times. But the NFL's made this such a big spectacle. Do we really need a primetime show to release them? It's like the bracket now. I hate it. But I do care about the schedule. I mean, it is important. And it's important for fans. This fan base travels so well.
Yeah.
That's important. You want to see where the Eagles go on which week and what time and all that stuff. So it is important.
We have a couple of frigid affairs that we have to go to on the road. When you look at the schedule and you see Buffalo and Green Bay, the first thing you're thinking is, please don't make it happen in November, December. Please don't let that. Yeah. Of course, you go to Buffalo in September, you get off the plane, it's cold, it's dreary. It's like, is there anything pleasant about Buffalo?
No, I don't know. Probably not. I mean, you hope that those games are early for our sake. Me being very selfish about it. I hope Miami is late. Make the Miami game in December.
Yes.
We have some cold ones. Buffalo, Green Bay, and Minnesota this year.
But at least Minnesota's in a dome. We don't have to stay outside for that.
You got to walk to the dome. You got to be outside of some place.
Don't be a wimp, man.
Well, you weren't cold that week at the Super Bowl?
We're not looking at the past, we're looking at the future.
Coldest week of my life.
You're going to have an Indian summer in Minnesota whenever we have to go. Now,
I don't think they have those there.
Before games are played, there's still an NFL draft to take place. Now, yesterday, Howie Roseman spoke with reporters about a variety of topics, including the importance of this year's draft, considering the age of his current roster. Here's what Howie had to say. Now, to get younger just for the sake of getting younger doesn't make a lot of sense to us. We're looking for good players, and we have a lot of good players. I don't think there's any undue pressure on the picks that we have right now. Dave, he seems to be downplaying the importance of this particular draft anyway, but how important is the draft for the future?
Yeah, he can downplay it all he wants. It's important. They have 3 picks in the first 57. I mean, this is a prime chance for them to infuse their roster with young talent. And I understand what he was saying yesterday. Don't just get young players to get young players. What they've done, and I think he took offense to the question a little bit. No one's faulting him for what they did over the last few years. They had a chance to win a Super Bowl. They did.
Right.
They've made moves over the last couple of years to try to win right now, as they should. But you look at the roster, and right now it's an aging roster. You got to get younger. The key part about getting younger for me is that you're going to have to pay Carson Wentz. And when you pay him, you're talking about $30 million plus to one guy. How do you win with a quarterback making that much money? You put young guys around him, because what are young guys? They're cheap.
Sure.
You got to do it that way if you're going to pay your quarterback this much money.
The way I look at it, anytime you have an opportunity to win, you take it now. I look at a team like the New England Patriots, and basically, for them, the draft is an afterthought. This is a team that always goes out and picks up somebody else's proven commodity and plugs it in. Now, that theory doesn't work for everybody, but it did work for the Eagles in 2017. When you look at what they did, they went out and got Alshon, they went out and got, look at Blunt, Patrick Robinson, Nick Foles, Jay Ajayi. I mean, they just added all kind of veteran players, and it worked for them. And I'm looking at this current roster that they have now. I think they, as Howie stated to us, they have a roster they feel good about that can compete right now. And I think when I compare it to the other rosters as we see them now in the NFC, I think this roster is good enough to compete to get to the NFC Championship game. Now, a team like New Orleans is going to have something to say about that, and maybe a couple of other teams that we're overlooking right now. But you do have to build, and you're right. But I think in this case, with those 3 prime picks that the Eagles have right now, if they don't trade one of them to try to move up, is unless it's a linebacker, none of these guys have to come in and play right now. The onus is not on them to be star players right from the start. They can kind of gradually get adjusted because they're playing behind proven veterans.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point, too, because right now, so many teams go into the draft and think, we got to get a guy at this position.
Yeah.
And the way Howie Roseman's done it is they pretty much fill their starters, or they have this year, with the free agency market, and now they can kind of get some depth when you talk about the draft, and guys who can be rotational players who could start if you need them to. And that's pretty ideal to me, because the last thing you want is to go into a draft thinking we have to draft this position. That's when you end up with Marcus Smith. I mean, that's where you make a reach that you shouldn't. And the Eagles have positioned themselves. They don't have to worry about that. They can just kind of let the board come to them, and they're in a great spot because they don't need something at 25. If they want to move up and they think there's a target worthy, they can do it. If they want to move back and pick up some more picks, if that's the way the draft falls, they can do it. They've left themselves with so much flexibility going into this draft, and I'm pretty sure that's exactly what they wanted.
All right, well, today marks exactly 10 years since the Eagles pulled the trigger on a franchise-altering move. It was on this date in 2009 that they acquired Jason Peters from the Buffalo Bills. Now, Dave, you wrote an oral history of the move and how it came to pass. What stood out to you from the interviews you've done?
It was interesting, a few things. I mean, I wasn't covering the team when this trade went down, so a lot of it was new to me. But the interest they had in Jason Peters dating all the way back to 2004 was pretty interesting. I mean, Howie Roseman saw this guy when the Bills brought him in the first time as a tight end, and they're teaching him how to play offensive tackle. I mean, their interest in Jason Peters goes back that far. They thought about trying to poach him that year, and then the Bills brought him up and they lost their chance. And then, 5 years later, they see that he's in a contract dispute. Joe Banner told me they were keeping an eye on him, and then once they saw, Jason Peters held out in the training camp before the 2008 season, well, Joe Banner noticed that and said, let's make a phone call, let's see what happens. And the other interesting thing is the reason he was holding out was because he wanted to get paid.
Right.
And the Bills just weren't going to pay him that much money. It took some foresight from the Eagles to go ahead and pay him. It had been a few years before the last record-setting deal for an offensive tackle. They jumped the market by about 20%, which is significant at that point for a guy who had grown into a Pro Bowler, but you didn't know that he was going to go on to have a Hall of Fame career at that point. And they were confident enough that they broke the bank for this guy, and 10 years later, here we are, and he's going to probably end up in the Hall of Fame one day.
You were just mentioning Joe Banner. Speaking of the former Eagles president, here's what he had to say when he was asked if Peters is a Hall of Famer. He said, absolutely, not even close, not even close. If he isn't, who is? So, Dave, you agree they should start making this bust in Canton right now?
Yeah, I mean, look, I understand why there's some hesitation for people who haven't been around him that much, but when you start looking at numbers, 9 Pro Bowls, that's pretty significant. Only 2 All-Pros, but you have to remember he played in an era with Joe Thomas, who is no doubt about it, first ballot Hall of Famer. Maybe those All-Pros or the lack of them hurt him, but you look at Jason Peters and the things he was able to do athletically. Joe Thomas was a great player. No question he's Hall of Fame.
Right. So Jason Peters will protect Carson Wentz's blind side, and Desean Jackson will provide the deep threat for the quarterback that he's been missing. Earlier this week, for the first time, Wentz discussed the impact of adding DJ.
It's without a doubt exciting. I mean, you see the guy, obviously he's getting up there in his age, but he still runs like the wind. I mean, he's impressive on film. Seen it firsthand last year, opening play of the game we played them, and the guy still got it. So it's without a doubt exciting, and I think he'll bring a dynamic aspect to our offense. And whether he's catching balls, during the game or just, opening things up underneath, I mean, I'm really excited to have him.
All right, how lethal do you think this combination can be?
It can be pretty lethal. I mean, you look at Carson Wentz in his career, he hasn't had this guy. I mean, Mike Wallace was supposed to be that deep threat for him last year, and the two never played together.
Right.
Carson didn't come back until week 3. Mike Wallace got hurt in week 2. You look at the stats, Desean Jackson in his career, what he's done, he's the best deep threat I've ever seen, probably the league's ever seen. 40 catches of 50-plus yards. Second on that list is Mike Wallace, with 26. So it just gives you an idea of how historically great Desean's been as a deep threat guy. And Carson Wentz isn't known for throwing the deep ball, but he has the arm. I mean, we see it at practice. If he had someone who can consistently get open down the field, he's going to throw it. Don't you agree? I mean, we've seen at times, like the Bryce Treggs of the world, Torrey Smith, those guys were his best deep threats, and Desean is just on a completely other level.
I look at Desean Jackson's numbers over his career: 173 catches of 20-plus yards, 63 catches of 40-plus yards. He has 397 catches for first downs, and for his career, his average is over 17 yards per catch. I don't think he gets enough credit for what he's capable of doing, because if you look at his career numbers, he goes from 1,000 yards to 800, 1,000 yards back to 900, 1,000 yards to 700. And I understand you have to figure in the injury factor as well, but when he's right, when he's healthy, I don't think there's anybody better than going after a ball. And no matter where you throw it, Desean Jackson can go get it.
It's amazing that with the kind of player he is, that he's lasted this long, because I think a lot of us thought his body was going to break down, the speed was going to go. And there he was at 31 last year. He led the league in average yards per catch for the 4th time in his career. It's unbelievable.
Can't wait to see how it all pans out. All right, coming up next, Jeffrey Lurie has
some plans, home games and road trips alike. Lambeau Field in September. How about Miami in December? You got to sign me up for that when the Eagles kick off their season at home against division rival Redskins Week 1. The first month features primetime road games in Atlanta and at Green Bay. Noticeably tough stretch for weeks 6 through 8 with 3 consecutive road games. The Birds have a playoff rematch with the Bears before hitting their bye week in Week 10. That gives them 2 weeks to prepare for the Patriots. And then they close the season with 4 consecutive NFC East games. For more on this week, check in with Derrick Gunn and Reuben Frank.
We've been waiting a long time to find out what days and what times the Eagles are going to play in 2019. And Reuben, when I look at the schedule, the first thing that jumps out at me is we get rid of the cold weather teams in a hurry. Green Bay, Minnesota, Buffalo, all before the month of October ends.
I knew that would be big for you, just trying to avoid the snow.
Weather, man.
You're such a weenie.
Now, the next thing I notice is the fact, boy, they've got a tough trio of games in the middle of the season. They have the Bears at home, the Patriots at home, and the Seahawks at home.
Now, you preface this with the fact that you never know one year to the next. Teams that were 12-4 last year could easily go 4-12. That's the nature of the NFL. But it certainly looks like the first 5 weeks when you have the Skins, Falcons, Lions, Packers, and Jets. Sure. All those teams had losing records last year. They were combined 30, 47, and 1 last year. Your first 5 opponents, and then it gets tough. Then you have 5 teams that had a combined record of 49 and 31. The good thing is that those tough teams that you have, those games are at home. So Seattle's got to come in here. They got to come to the link. The Patriots got to come to the link. The Bears got to come to the link. Yeah. So your toughest games are here, and I like the Eagles' chances at home. They're a very, very good home team.
Are you surprised that the regular season ends with 4 divisional games?
I love that, and that's the way, that's the new NFL. They're going to that. I love the fact that divisions, conferences, seedings are decided head-to-head. That's the way it should be. Good late in the season to win those games against your division. That's the way it should be.
When you break down this schedule even further, you look at it like this. The Eagles will have 10 games against teams with losing records, 6 games against teams with winning records, and within that, 5 teams that went to the playoffs, including the Dallas Cowboys. Back-to-back games of the season.
Pretty manageable schedule.
Yes, they are. So for my colleague Reuben Frank, I'm Derrick Gunn.